What's up, guys? Welcome back. Now we're going to be working on integrating OpenAI and ChatGPT and AI into our project. We're going to be using OpenAI, which I'm pretty sure you know of, unless you live under a rock. We're going to be using their API to integrate ChatGPT into our project to give us the macros. And more specifically, we're going to be using their new feature for function calling. And it's fairly new. When did OpenAI function calling? Yeah, it came out in June, so it's newish. They only have two libraries for it though. One in Python and one in Node.js for JavaScript. And they don't have a Swift one, but you can still interact with it. You just have to use URL requests to do so. And another alternative is there's actually an OpenAI Swift. If you look up OpenAI Swift GitHub, you'll see this. This is built by some people in the community. MacPaw, shout out to whoever that is, that person or organization. They built this cool library. We're not going to be using this though because we're going to get our hands dirty, and we're actually going to create the URL request and do this all on our own. That way we understand what's going on. And I like doing it that way. Gives you more experience. And so we're gonna log in or create an account if you don't have one, and you go to API, and we need a GPT and function calling, and you guys can review this. And the examples they have though are all going to be in Python or Node.js, I believe. Yeah, that's the only examples they have. So what's function calling? I'd say there's like two main things you can really do, or powerful things that you can do. The first one is you can get a JSON response from OpenAI or ChatGPT that returns you certain parameters that you specified you wanted. Like, for example, in our case, we're going to want the fats, the proteins, and the carbs, and we're going to want those in integer format. And we can tell ChatGPT to send that back to us in that format. If you weren't using function calling, you'd get a JSON that would just have a string with the response, and you'd have to find out some way to dissect what the number for the fats, the carbs, and the proteins were. But with this, it gives you exactly what you asked for. And in our case, that's it. But you can also use that information to call a function somewhere else, like on an API. And that's what they go through in this example. This example shows people having, well, not people, but the AI and the client or the app having a conversation. And the app sends it, what's the weather like in Boston? And that triggers this function to be called. And in the response, it says, the response tells you what functions were called, if any were called. And right here is where they actually make a call to this function, which is supposed to hit an API and return the weather. We're not going to be doing anything like that. Although you could, in our case, you could maybe connect to a macrotracker API, but that's not the way we're going to go with it in this course. We're going to be using ChatGPT just to give us the answers. There are a few APIs for macro tracking, but I think using ChatGPT like this is the best way, and it's a good experience to get used to function calling. But all right. That's a small gist on function calling. It's pretty neat. It's pretty neat. Now, enough of talking about function calling. Let's integrate this. So OpenAI doesn't have like documentation on how to get started in like Swift specifically. So I'll just walk you guys through that in the Xcode project. So what we need to do first is create a new file, and we're gonna just a Swift file. This will be our OpenAI service. And you can create this a class, call it OpenAI service. Thank you, Xcode, for the auto completion. Cool, and we're gonna make this a singleton, of course. Why not? Why not create it a singleton? Just makes it a lot easier to work with. And you want to have a private init to make it a true singleton. Although sometimes you don't want a private init. It really depends on your use case. But if you want a true singleton, then you always want a private init. That just guarantees that this can only be initialized, or there'll only be one instance of your API service in your app, which will be this one, and you have to access it by calling OpenAI service.shared. All right, and the first thing we need to do in here is we need to create a URL request, which we're gonna use to send a URL request to OpenAI. So let's call it generate URL request. And this is going to return a URL request. All right, so we're going to say let's guardlet URL equal. First, we need to create a URL. And we're going to do it with the string. And what URL are we using? So we're using HTTP. We're using this URL, which you can find. It should be somewhere in the documentation. Let's see, models. Here we go. This is the API endpoint. And this is what we'll have to hit. So this is the one we'll use. And I'll put this in the description. So we copy this and you put that in your Xcode, right? Else we return. And we get an error here. So we can mark this throws and we can just throw, let's see, URL error, bad URL. Cool. And we can return URL requests for URL. But this is not it. We still have to do a lot of things actually. All right, so the first thing we have to do is create our URL requests. So let's call this URL request and we set it equal to this. And then we need to put the HTTP method on it, whether it's a post or a get. And I'm going to create an enum up here called HTTP method. And case is post. Case is get. And we can actually assign these values. And I believe we'll have to conform to string. And we can say HTTP method and require an HTTP method type when we assign this. Or yeah, when we call this function. All right, and we'll say URL request dot HTTP method equals HTTP method raw value. All right, now we need our headers. So we're going to call this. So to create a header, all you need to do is say add value to the URL request, and that'll create the header. And let's add a comment here. So this is the method. This is the header of the URL request. Just want to put those comments in there, and then we need to add some values. So what do we need? So for OpenAI, you need two headers. URL request add value. The first header you need is gonna be content type. And for this one, it's application JSON. Basically explicitly stating what type of content we're gonna be sending to it and receiving. All right, make sure there's no application JSON. You need to be careful here because if there's a typo, it'll throw off your whole response. For the next one, we need authorization. And now we need to grab our API key and we're gonna send that in this header. So let's do that. Let's go to OpenAI. And to get your API keys, you just click on your account, go to view API keys. And we're going to create a new one, macro 2.0. And you create this key and you keep it secret. Make sure nobody gets it or they're going to be able to access it. So, and what I'm going to do to keep my key secret, to keep my key secret, I'm going to create a secrets file. And I'm going to create an enum in here called secrets static let API key equal. And I'm going to paste my API key in here. And we're going to be able to call this in bearer. Well, we call to use an API key, you need to say bear, and then make sure you have a space, and then you pass the API key in here. So we can call secrets dot API key. Now hit Command B, the error goes away, and I still need to paste my key in here, so that's what I'm gonna do, and we'll come back. So now we have our headers. We could test this out, but I'm pretty sure it's not gonna give us nothing, because what are we gonna be sending to OpenAI? It's gonna be like, what? So before we test it out, we need to add stuff to our body. And the body is where you're gonna add stuff like the messages you wanna send when you're using OpenAI. And in our case, we're gonna send what the user puts in for the macro tracker. And then for the body, we're gonna do quite a bit of things, because we have to set up all the stuff required for function calling in Swift or in any language when you're sending it in the body. So let's go back to OpenAI and let's see, here we go. This is really good. This is what I want. This is what we were looking for. The API reference. So to send something, this is legacy. Why does it say legacy? Wait, where's the new one then? All right, so we need to go to create chat completions section, and the top one is what we're looking for. And this is basically what we've been doing in the past few minutes, because this is the URL request, or the URL that you need to send the request to, and you need to make sure it's a post, and we'll handle that when we call the function. And you need to pass in something like this. And that's what we're going to be working on next. So you need to pass a model and a message, and this is required, and this is what would give you the chat functionality. So think about it as, like, let's say you were using ChatGPT, like you send it something and you receive something. That's basically what this would do if you just had these. And in this case, it would just be you sending a message, and you would get the response from ChatGPT. So we're going to have to send this in the body. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to create some models. So we're going to create a bunch of models that we're going to encode using the JSON encoder. And then we're going to add that to the body of our URL request, so that our URL request has that JSON, and OpenAI knows exactly what we want. So a cool thing you could do, or a neat way or trick of doing this, is you could copy this and literally go to ChatGPT and tell it to create the models for you, and just see what it gives you. That's like a new way of doing it, and sometimes it's wrong, but it gives you a good start. In our case, I already know what we need to create, so that I'm just gonna do that here on the side. So the first thing we're gonna create is a message. And if you guys see here, that's one of the first things that the response or the request is gonna require. It's gonna want you to send like an array of messages. So I'm gonna call this let's create a struct, call it GPT messages. And let me scroll up a bit, or call it message. And make sure this conforms to encodable. Hit Command B, and in each message, there's gonna be a role which specifies who's sending it. Like, is it from the system, from the user? And we also want a content. Let content, this will be a string, and that's a message. So we can actually create a message. And the first message we want to create is the user message. And we say GPT user message, and this is from the user. And this will be the content, which in our case, we need to pass into the function. We can call, what should we call this? We should call this message. And this is the message that's going to be sent from the user. And in our case, in this video, or And in our case, for the project, it's going to be the food item or meal that they had. And something else you can add is a system message. And in our case, we can just say this is from the system. And this would just help ChatGPT get more context when it's answering these questions from the user. And in our case, you are a macronutrient expert. Cool. And this is not enough, because the next thing we need to give it more context, right? Because in our case, this would just be a food item, so it won't know what to do. So now we would have to bring in the function calling. And you guys see here, the function is an array. Let's see if they have an example with the function calling. No function calling example. But what I did is go to the documentation. And if we go to GPT function calling, in here, this is what I use to get like a better idea, because this is the messages, right? And we already handled this. So now we need to handle the function part. And the functions is an array, and that's what the documentation said, right? Yeah, it said it's an array. Cool. And this is what's in a function. And if we look closely, there's 1, 2, it looks like 3 things in the function only. Or in this function object, there's 3 things. There's a name, there's a description, and the parameters. So we will call this a GPT function. Make it encodable. And you literally just a name. And if we look closely, name is a string. Description is a string. And parameters is where things get a little and you want to actually copy and pasting is probably the best here, because you want to make sure there's no errors in your spelling, because you have an error and you'll be banging your head on why it's not working, and it's because you misspelled one word. All right, so this is an object. Oh no, wait, sorry. This parameters is an object. So we'll have to actually create that here. So struct, caps lock, struct, GPT function parameter encodable. And it doesn't conform to encodable because we haven't done this. All right. And now you can actually paste this part in here. And we can minimize this, to be honest. We can get rid of just so it doesn't get too big, too crazy. All right, and this is a parameter. So what do we need in our parameter? And now we look in our parameter object. What do we have here? We have types, property looks like. So this belongs here. Property is an object. So we have a type, properties, and required. So let's just copy this because we have to be careful. String. And you have a property. That properties. Oh, it's properties. See, I would have got it wrong. And required. And this looks like it's an array. And this is an array of strings. And this can be optional in case there is nothing that's required. And for this properties, there may be multiple properties, right? But all of them will be of type string, like the key. The key of it will be a type string, and then the value will be of type, will be an object. And we can create that object using GPT, what do we call this? A function property. And make this encodable. And again, this can be optional. All right, and then what happens in property? In a property, we have a type, and we have a, which is a string, and we also have a description, which is a string. Let me paste that. All right, Command B. And we have no errors, so our models are looking good. We don't know if they're working yet, but we have no errors from Xcode. And that's all we should need. And now we have to go back up and use this in our body. So I'm going to move this to the side, and I'm going to widen this. And I'll just be looking back and forth because I'm looking at the documentation. So the first thing we need to create is our function. So we'll have a name. The name of this will be get macronutrients description. Get the macronutrients for a given food item. Or we'll just say given food. And now we need some params. So let's function params equal a GPT function parameters. And if we look at the documentation, the function, or not document, but the reference, the parameters are this. So for our parameters, we're going to want an object as well. So make sure you have a string of an object. And then we need our properties. But we can actually create our properties under here. And I think we might have to change this order because we are declaring this before we use it. So I'm going to move this up here. And move this up here. And for this one, so under properties, we need to specify all the things we want. And we want to have, we're going to have four properties, actually. The first property is we need ChatGPT to identify the food item. So they need to do that. And then we need a fat property for the fats, carbs, and then proteins. So we need 4 in total. All right, let food equal GPT property, function property, this one. And this is a type string. And this is the type that you'll want it to return. And the description is the food item, e.g. hamburger. I can't spell hamburger. I can't spell hamburger. All right, the next one, let's do fats. And this is a GPT function property. We actually want this to be an integer. And you could go with number, which would give you a double, but we want integer. And we'll say the amount of fats in the given food item. We'll say actually the amount of fats in grams of the given food item. Grams. I spelled grams wrong. Let's see. The next one is carbs. Oh my God. I can't type right now. And then it's protein. Boom. Send that. And then we need to change this to carbohydrates. and protein. And then for the params, we can let params equal, let's create a string and GPT function property. The first one is going to be food, belonging to food. Then is fats, belonging to fats. Then we need carbs, which will belong to carbs. And then protein, which will belong to protein. Command B. Then we can paste that in here. And for required, this is where you would specify which one are required. In our case, they're all required. So we need to say food, fats, carbs, and protein. Make sure the spelling is exactly the same or you'll get an issue. And then we call the function params here. And dang, that is a lot. But we're almost done. The next step is we actually have to encode all this stuff and to put it in our URL requests. So we have to encode it into JSON. And we can use a JSON encoder to encode value. And there is actually one thing that we missed, because we need to create a model that's going to host all of this stuff, because all of this is sent in one call or one network request. And if we go here, yeah, all of this is sent in one. And what is it? Is this one? Struct GPT. What should we call this? We'll say chat payload, since we're going to be sending this. We'll call it a payload. And in here, you can just see we need model and messages. And the thing we need is functions. Let model. This is a string, right? Yeah, model is a string. And then messages is an array of messages. And functions is an array of functions. Yep, it's an array. So we will say the next one is messages, which is an array of GPT message. And functions, which is an array of GPT functions. Hit Command B. And we need to say, we'll call this payload. Yeah, let's call it payload. GPT. GPT. So the model, we have to actually be very specific with our model, because there's only, which ones do, yeah, this one. We have to use this one or this one. We're going to use the turbo since it's faster and cheaper. And in here, we're going to pass in our messages. So you pass in the system message and the user message. And we pass in our function. And you could pass in multiple functions here, but we only have one. And let's try to encode our payload. And we get an error because we need to mark this try. Cool. And the last thing we need to do is say URL request dot body, set it equal to JSON data. And now we can return this URL request. Haha. And we're almost done. We're almost done. Whew. Quite a bit of code, and we haven't tested this, so it's going to be interesting. Make sure you guys don't have any typos and your models follow accordingly to this. All right, now let's create a function called send prompt to GPT or ChatGPT. And we'll say message, even though we called it prompt. This will be async throws. Cool. And what do we need to do? We need to create a URL request. Request generate URL request. This will be a post. And to be honest, sometimes you may want to this function to take in the URL, because you may be like, if you have an app with OpenAI and you're using like a lot of features, you might be using different things, right? Like, so you might be using embeddings or something like this, or like image generation. And that's why you may want to pass in this URL string as a parameter to this function. But in our case, we're not doing that. And we'll say message. And for this one, we need to try. Cool. And then when we have our URL request, we can call our URL request. And we get data and response. And we need to try await, because we're going to use URL session shared data for this one. We pass in the URL request. And the last thing we'll do is we're going to just print the string contents. This is what I like to do this sometimes. Like if you're not able to use Postman to check your URL, not your URL, but to check your responses, I like to just print a string of it, and that helps with decoding it. And I put date instead of data. Cool. Immutable value response. We're not going to worry about the response, to be honest. And if you force unwrap this, your app will crash, or you'll get a nice print statement compared to if you didn't put this in there. And now we need to go to our app. And let's go to macro view. And we're going to go to the bottom of this. Just create a task. Create a do catch block. Print error.localize description. And we're going to try to call this. So we're going to say OpenAI service.share.send prompt. And this is what we ate. So let's see. What did I eat? Let's say chicken. I said I ate a rotisserie chicken. Actually, no, wait. What's a good food item? Fuck. I'm blanking out here. A slice of cheese pizza. Let's just put that. No, I don't like it. Actually, yeah, let's just go with a slice of cheese pizza and see what it returns. And we're printing the contents, right? Cool. So let's run this and let's see what happens. Where is my simulator? All right, here we go. Let me... Oh, it ran. And it worked. Or wait, let's see first. Oh, it looks like it did work, because we got a response, which doesn't have an error, it looks like. So that's good. And now we look at the response and we have this stuff here. And I can tell it worked off the bat because we have this function call being created. And we have get macronutrients. And we have these arguments here. We have food, cheese pizza. And 36, 12 grams of protein and 10 grams of fats. Is that accurate? Let's ask Google actually. What is the macronutrient profile of a slice of cheese pizza? Wait, so let's see. Is this a whole oh yeah, one slice. Oh, this is pretty accurate. Oh, damn, that's pretty accurate. That is really cool. We still have to encode this and put it in our app, but damn, I thought ChatGPT was just gonna give us some random numbers, but it's pretty good. And I'm gonna stop here for now because we got a bit long. That's because we had to do all this stuff. And that's the downside, but also the upside. You get to like learn how to do stuff like this. And it's pretty cool. And there's a lot more that you can do with like function calling. We're just scratching the surface. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you guys like, comment, share, subscribe. Let me know how you feel about the series. Let me know if you run into any issues. Comment down below. And I'm going to see you guys in the next one where we'll be decoding this information from OpenAI and hopefully displaying it to our users. Peace.